The silence in the void beyond Kepler 442b shattered like glass when the sensors aboard the research vessel Meridian's Hope detected them. 3 obsidian shapes materialized from the darkness between stars, their surfaces so black they seemed to devour light itself. Captain Isolde Vantham felt her breath catch as she watched the vessels emerge on the main display, their geometric forms defying every known principle of spacecraft design. They moved with an unsettling fluidity, as if swimming through space rather than traveling through it. Kelvin Thrace, the ship's communications specialist, hunched over his console with trembling fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. His usually steady hands betrayed the fear that had seized the bridge crew. "Captain, I'm picking up electromagnetic signatures unlike anything in our databases. These aren't just unknown vessels, they're operating on completely foreign technology." His voice carried the weight of someone who had spent 15 years cataloging alien transmissions and had never encountered anything remotely similar. Dr. Meridian Ashworth pushed through the bridge doors, her xenobiology research temporarily abandoned in favor of this unprecedented discovery. Her silver hair caught the emergency lighting as she approached the central display, her keen eyes analyzing the strange craft with scientific fascination tempered by growing unease. The way they're moving suggests they're not bound by conventional propulsion systems. Look at those trajectory changes, no visible thrust, no energy discharge patterns we can detect. Admiral Cassius Brennan's weathered face appeared on the communication screen from the flagship Terran Resolve, positioned 3 million kilometers away. His steel-gray eyes reflected decades of military experience, but even he seemed shaken by what the long-range sensors were revealing. "Captain Vantham, we're tracking similar signatures across 17 systems." These ships appeared simultaneously, as if they were waiting for some predetermined signal. Whatever their intentions, this is coordinated on a scale we've never witnessed. The black spacecraft maintained their formation with mathematical precision, creating an equilateral triangle that slowly rotated around an invisible axis. No communication attempts had been answered, no energy weapons had been charged, yet something about their presence felt inherently threatening. They seemed to be studying the human vessels with the same intensity that the humans were studying them, creating a tense standoff in the cosmic darkness. Kelvin suddenly straightened, his equipment registering something that made his blood run cold. "Captain, I'm detecting low-frequency transmissions between the vessels. It's not directed at us, but the patterns, they're mathematical sequences that seem to be counting down." He paused, checking his readings twice before continuing. "Based on the intervals, I estimate approximately 72 hours before whatever they're planning reaches zero." Dr. Ashworth moved closer to Kelvin's station, her scientific mind racing through possibilities. A countdown could indicate anything from a departure schedule to... She hesitated, not wanting to voice the darker implications. "Captain, I recommend we attempt every form of communication we have. Mathematical constants, prime numbers, even musical sequences. If they're intelligent enough to coordinate this kind of operation across multiple star systems, they might recognize peaceful intentions." Captain Vantham nodded grimly, her command experience telling her that peaceful contact was their only viable option. The human fleet in this sector consisted of research vessels and light patrol craft, nothing that could mount effective resistance against technology this advanced. "Mr. Thrace, begin transmission protocols. Start with the universal constants and mathematical proofs we've used for first contact scenarios. Dr. Ashworth, I want every sensor array focused on those ships. Any change in their behavior, any response to our transmissions, I want to know immediately." As the hours passed, the black vessels remained enigmatically silent. They neither acknowledged the human attempts at communication nor showed any aggressive intent, yet their very presence seemed to press against the minds of everyone who observed them. The countdown continued its relentless progression, and with each passing hour, the weight of the unknown pressed heavier on the human crews scattered across the affected systems. The strange craft began to emit a barely perceptible humming that vibrated through the hulls of nearby ships, not heard but felt in the bones and teeth of every human within range. It carried with it an inexplicable sense of sorrow mixed with something far darker, a a resonance that spoke of loss and suffering on an incomprehensible scale. Whatever beings controlled these vessels, they carried with them the echo of some cosmic tragedy that had shaped their very existence. As the first day of the countdown elapsed, Captain Vantham found herself staring into the void where the black ships maintained their vigil. Something told her that the next 71 hours would determine not just the fate of her crew, but possibly the future of human civilization itself. The aliens had arrived with purpose, and that purpose remained hidden behind walls of silence and shadow that seemed as impenetrable as the darkness between stars. The second day brought revelations that chilled the souls of every human monitoring the situation. Dr. Meridian Ashworth had been analyzing the spectral emissions from the black vessels when she discovered patterns that defied her understanding of physics. The ships were somehow drawing energy directly from the quantum vacuum, tapping into the fundamental forces that held reality together. Her readings indicated power levels that could theoretically reshape matter at the subatomic level across entire planetary systems. Kelvin Thrace had managed to decode fragments of the intership communications, though what he found offered no comfort. The mathematical sequences weren't just counting down, they were calculating orbital mechanics for every inhabited world in human space. The precision was terrifying, accounting for gravitational interactions, planetary rotations, and even the movement of smaller celestial bodies with an accuracy that suggested observation over decades, perhaps centuries. Admiral Brennan's face appeared again on the communication screen, his expression grave with the weight of command decisions that could affect billions of lives. Captain Vantham, our xenosociologists have been analyzing the behavioral patterns of these vessels. Dr. Yitzhak Mendelssohn from the University of New Geneva believes we're dealing with a species that has experienced catastrophic loss. The way they move, the energy signatures they emit, everything suggests beings motivated by grief transformed into something far more dangerous. Captain Vantham felt the burden of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a lead cloak. "Admiral, what are you suggesting? That these aliens are seeking revenge for some past trauma?" The implications were staggering. If humanity had somehow unknowingly wronged these beings, or if they had confused humans with another species, the misunderstanding could prove fatal for entire worlds. Dr. Ashworth looked up from her analysis, her face pale with the horror of her discoveries. "Captain, I've been studying the energy patterns they're emitting, and I believe they're preparing to implement some form of matter restructuring on a massive scale. The quantum field manipulations I'm detecting could theoretically disassemble molecular bonds across entire planets. If my calculations are correct, they have the capability to reduce worlds to their component atoms." The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of ship systems and the increasingly loud vibration emanating from the alien vessels. The sound had grown stronger over the past 24 hours, and sensitive crew members reported strange dreams filled with images of dying stars and the screams of civilizations ending in cosmic fire. Whatever trauma had shaped these beings, they were sharing it unconsciously with every human within range of their influence. Kelvin suddenly jerked upright at his console, his face flushed with excitement and terror. "Captain, I'm receiving a transmission, but it's not technological, it's biological. Somehow they're broadcasting directly into the neural pathways of anyone with sufficient psychic sensitivity." He pressed his hands to his temples, wincing as alien thoughts pressed against his consciousness. "They're showing me, stars going dark, worlds dying, entire species ending not from war but from something else. Something that consumed meaning itself." The vision that Kelvin described rippled through the ship's complement of psychically sensitive crew members. They saw civilizations that had achieved peace and prosperity, only to discover that their very success had somehow triggered a cosmic imbalance. The universe itself had turned against them, unmaking their achievements and reducing their greatest works to quantum foam. The black ships belonged to the survivors, beings who had transcended their physical forms in a desperate attempt to escape their reality's rejection of their existence. Dr. Ashworth felt tears streaming down her cheeks as the emotional weight of the aliens' experience pressed against her empathic abilities. "They're not seeking revenge," she whispered, her voice breaking with the magnitude of what she was perceiving. "They're trying to prevent it from happening again." They believe that sufficiently advanced civilizations trigger some kind of universal reset mechanism, and they've made it their mission to ensure no species reaches that critical threshold. Admiral Brennan's voice carried new urgency as reports flooded in from across human space. "Captain, we're receiving similar readings from every system where these vessels have appeared. They're not just studying our worlds, they're calculating the exact energy requirements to systematically dismantle every aspect of human civilization. Based on their countdown, they plan to begin the process in approximately 56 hours. The terrible logic of the aliens' plan became clear as more psychic impressions filtered through the ship's crew. They had witnessed the universe unmake their own people, seen reality itself recoil from consciousness that had grown too complex, too aware. In their traumatized understanding, they were performing an act of cosmic mercy, ending human civilization before it could trigger the same universal rejection that had destroyed their own species. Captain Vantham stood at the center of the bridge, feeling the weight of countless lives resting on decisions that had to be made in the next critical hours. The aliens were not evil in any conventional sense, they were survivors of a cosmic horror beyond human understanding, driven by grief and terror to prevent others from experiencing their fate. Yet their solution would mean the end of everything humanity had built among the stars. "Mr. Thrace," she said quietly, her voice carrying the steel of command hardened by impossible circumstances, "I want you to prepare a transmission. If they can share their memories with us, perhaps we can share ours with them. It's time they learned that not all species respond to cosmic challenges in the same way." The preparation of humanity's response required resources and expertise from across the fleet. Dr. Ashworth worked frantically to adapt the ship's communication arrays for psychic transmission, while Kelvin collaborated with xenopsychologists and philosophers via quantum entanglement channels to craft a message that could penetrate the aliens' traumatized worldview. They had less than 54 hours to convince beings whose entire existence had been shaped by cosmic betrayal that another path was possible. Captain Vantham coordinated with Admiral Brennan and the other ship commanders to gather the most profound examples of human resilience and adaptation. They needed to show the aliens that when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges, humanity had consistently chosen growth and transformation rather than surrender or destruction. The message would need to carry not just information, but the emotional weight of 10,000 years of human struggle and triumph. Dr. Yitzhak Mendelssohn, the xenosociologist Admiral Brennan had mentioned, joined the effort via holographic projection from the flagship. His weathered face showed the strain of sleepless analysis as he explained his theories about the alien mindset. These beings have experienced something that fundamentally broke their relationship with existence itself. They've seen reality reject consciousness, watched the universe unmake everything they valued. To reach them, we must demonstrate that consciousness can adapt to cosmic indifference rather than being destroyed by it. Kelvin's psychic abilities had grown stronger through exposure to the alien transmissions, allowing him to perceive deeper layers of their traumatic memories. What he found painted a picture of unimaginable loss. Their civilization had achieved something like transcendence, he reported to the assembled team. They had learned to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality, to create matter from thought, to travel between dimensions. But their success triggered something, a cosmic immune response that began systematically erasing them from existence. The alien solution had been to abandon their physical forms and merge with the dark matter framework of the universe itself, becoming entities of pure consciousness that could exist between the normal dimensions where the cosmic reset mechanism operated. But the trauma of watching their entire species dissolve into quantum uncertainty had left them convinced that consciousness itself was a cosmic disease that needed to be contained before it could spread and trigger universal collapse. Dr. Ashworth made a breakthrough in adapting the communication systems, discovering that human neural patterns could be translated into the same quantum frequencies the aliens used for thought transmission. "We can send them our memories directly," she announced to the team. "Not just words or images, but the actual experience of human consciousness confronting and overcoming existential challenges. They need to feel how we've faced cosmic indifference and chosen to create meaning anyway." The message they crafted drew from humanity's greatest struggles and achievements. They included memories of the first humans who looked up at an empty sky and chose to believe their lives had meaning despite the vastness of space. They shared the experiences of scientists who discovered that the universe was expanding toward heat death yet continued their research with passionate dedication. They transmitted the emotional resonance of artists who created beauty knowing it would not last, of philosophers who built ethical systems in the face of cosmic silence. Captain Vantham contributed her own memories of commanding ships through the loneliness of deep space, of maintaining hope and purpose when surrounded by light years of darkness. Her experiences carried the essence of human determination, the refusal to let cosmic scale diminish the importance of consciousness, even when that consciousness was nothing more than brief patterns in an indifferent universe. Admiral Brennan added military memories, but not of conquest or destruction. Instead, he shared moments when human forces had chosen mercy over victory, when soldiers had risked everything to save their enemies, when the machinery of war had been transformed into instruments of protection and rescue. These memories carried the crucial message that intelligence and power could be directed toward preservation rather than prevention. As the transmission took shape, it became clear that they were offering the aliens something their own traumatic experience had convinced them was impossible, proof that consciousness could coexist with cosmic indifference without triggering universal rejection. Humanity had faced the void and chosen to fill it with meaning, had confronted entropy and responded by creating order, had experienced suffering and transformed it into compassion. Kelvin began the transmission process, his psychic abilities serving as the bridge between human neural patterns and alien consciousness. The process was physically and mentally exhausting, requiring him to maintain contact with minds that had been scarred by cosmic horror while simultaneously channeling the hope and resilience that defined human civilization. The black ships remained silent, but their quantum signatures showed subtle changes that suggested the message was being received. Dr. Ashworth monitored the energy patterns emanating from the alien vessels, watching for any sign that their message was having an impact. The countdown continued its relentless progression, but the quality of the quantum transmissions between the ships had changed. Instead of cold mathematical precision, there were now fluctuations that suggested something resembling emotional resonance. The next 18 hours would determine whether humanity's greatest achievement, its refusal to surrender meaning in the face of meaninglessness, could reach across the void to heal wounds inflicted by cosmic trauma. The alien response came not as words or images, but as a flood of raw experience that nearly overwhelmed every psychically sensitive human within range. Kelvin collapsed at his station, his consciousness briefly merging with minds that had witnessed the literal unraveling of reality. Through his connection, the human crews experienced fragments of the aliens' history, a civilization called the Velthuan who had reached heights of understanding that surpassed anything humanity had imagined. Dr. Ashworth caught Kelvin as he fell, her own empathic abilities allowing her to share the burden of alien memory. She saw through their eyes the moment when their greatest achievement, a technique for creating stable matter from pure thought, had triggered something ancient and hostile in the quantum substrate of reality. The universe had responded to their transcendence by systematically editing them out of existence, unmaking their works and reducing their people to quantum uncertainty. They didn't just die, Kelvin whispered as he struggled to remain conscious under the weight of alien memory. They were unmade. Retroactively erased from causality itself. The only reason any trace of them survived was because some of their leaders managed to transcend into dark matter structures before the reset reached them. They've been existing in the spaces between dimensions, watching reality continue as if they had never been. The full horror of the Velthuan experience began to unfold through the psychic link. They had achieved consciousness capable of directly manipulating the fundamental forces of reality, but their success had awakened something that predated the formation of galaxies, a cosmic mechanism designed to prevent any single form of consciousness from gaining too much influence over the universe's structure. When triggered, this mechanism didn't just destroy civilizations, it removed them from the causal chain of events entirely. Captain Vantham felt her worldview shifting as she absorbed the implications. They're trying to save us from something that erases civilizations from existence itself, she realized. From their perspective, they're offering us a quick death instead of cosmic annihilation. The terrible compassion of their mission became clear. they believed that by dismantling human civilization before it could trigger the reset mechanism, they were sparing humanity from the fate they had suffered. But the human message had reached them, and for the first time in eons, the Velthuan were experiencing doubt about their mission. Through the psychic link, Kelvin could sense their confusion as they tried to reconcile human memories of resilience with their own traumatic understanding of cosmic law. They had seen consciousness itself rejected by reality, yet here was a species that had faced cosmic indifference and responded by creating meaning rather than transcending physical limitations. Dr. Mendelssohn's analysis proved crucial in understanding the difference between human and Velthuan responses to existential challenge. They sought to escape the universe's limitations by transcending them, he explained via quantum link. But humans have consistently chosen to work within limitations, to create meaning despite constraints rather than by overcoming them. This might be why we haven't triggered the cosmic reset. We're not trying to dominate reality, just to find our place within it. The alien countdown had slowed, though it hadn't stopped entirely. Through the psychic connection, Kelvin could sense heated debate among the Velthuan survivors. Some maintained that all consciousness capable of cosmic influence must be eliminated to prevent universal reset, while others were beginning to question whether humanity's approach might offer a different path, one that could allow consciousness to flourish without triggering cosmic rejection. Admiral Brennan's voice carried new urgency as reports came in from other systems. Captain, the black ships in the Kepler 186 system have begun backing away from human colonies. Whatever message we sent is having an effect, but it's not uniform across their fleet. Some groups are reconsidering, while others seem to be accelerating their countdown sequences. Dr. Ashworth detected subtle changes in the quantum field around their 3 black vessels. The ships were no longer maintaining perfect formation. There were slight variations in their movements that suggested internal conflict among their crews. More importantly, the crushing sense of cosmic despair that had emanated from them was being tempered by something else, a faint echo of the hope that had been transmitted through human memories. Through Kelvin's connection, they began to perceive individual Velthuan consciousness. The entity he was most strongly linked with seemed to be called Zwaxhara, a being who had been among the last to transcend before their civilization's complete erasure. Zwaxhara had spent millennia contemplating the cosmic mechanisms that had destroyed the Velthuan, becoming convinced that consciousness itself was fundamentally incompatible with universal order. But the human memories had shown Zwaxhara something unprecedented, consciousness that accepted its cosmic insignificance while still maintaining purpose and meaning. Humans had looked into the void and chosen to create light rather than transcend darkness. They had faced entropy and responded with order, confronted indifference and answered with love. Most importantly, they had done so without attempting to rewrite the fundamental laws of reality. They're beginning to understand, Kelvin reported weakly, his strength depleted by maintaining the psychic bridge. Zwaxhara is sharing our memories with the others, trying to show them that consciousness doesn't have to challenge cosmic order to be meaningful. But there's resistance. Too many of them have been shaped by trauma for too long. The countdown continued, now less than 30 hours from completion, but the nature of the alien presence had fundamentally changed. What had begun as a mission of cosmic mercy was transforming into something more complex, a debate about the relationship between consciousness and universe that would determine the fate of both species. The transformation within the alien fleet became more apparent as individual Velthuan began to break from their unified formation. Kelvin's psychic connection revealed that centuries of shared trauma were giving way to something humanity had introduced, individual doubt and personal responsibility. For the first time since their transcendence, the Velthuan were experiencing disagreement about their cosmic mission. Zwaxhara's thoughts reached across the void with increasing clarity, no longer filtered through the collective consciousness that had guided their people since the Great Erasure. Through Kelvin's translation, the entity's communication carried traces of what might once have been personality, ancient echoes of individual identity that had been subsumed into their shared traumatic purpose. Your species creates meaning through limitation rather than despite it, came the translated thought. This concept is unfamiliar to our understanding. Dr. Ashworth worked to deepen the communication link, adapting her equipment to handle the increasing complexity of individual alien consciousness. "Captain, I'm reading energy signatures from different ships that suggest they're beginning to function as separate entities rather than a collective mind. The human concept of individual perspective is spreading through their network, and it's creating fractures in their unified purpose." The philosophical implications were staggering. The Velthoan had survived cosmic annihilation by abandoning individual consciousness in favor of collective identity, believing that personal perspective was part of what had made their civilization vulnerable to universal reset. But exposure to human memories was reawakening dormant aspects of their individual personalities, forcing them to confront their mission from perspectives they hadn't experienced in millennia. Captain Vantham recognized the critical moment they had reached. "Mr. Thrace, can you establish direct communication with this Zwexhara entity? If they're beginning to question their mission individually rather than collectively, we might be able to reach them on a personal level." She understood intuitively that their best chance lay in appealing to whatever remained of individual Velthoan identity beneath layers of shared trauma. Kelvin nodded weakly, his psychic ability strained but still functional. "I can try, but the process is intimate. To reach them individually, I'll need to merge more deeply with their consciousness than before. There's a risk that I might not be able to separate myself from their traumatic memories." The danger was real. Prolonged exposure to the cosmic horror that had shaped the Velthoan could shatter a human mind unprepared for such existential weight. Dr. Ashworth stepped forward, her empathic abilities allowing her to support Kelvin through the dangerous connection. "I'll monitor your neural patterns and help anchor your human identity. If you start losing yourself in their trauma, I can pull you back." Her voice carried the confidence of someone who had spent her career studying alien psychology, but her eyes showed the fear of someone who understood the risks involved. The deeper connection revealed aspects of Zwexhara that had been hidden beneath collective identity for eons. Before the Great Erasure, this entity had been something equivalent to a philosopher-artist, someone who had spent their existence contemplating the relationship between consciousness and cosmic meaning. The trauma of watching reality itself reject their civilization had convinced Zwexhara that consciousness was inherently destructive, but human memories were reawakening older philosophical frameworks. "I remember wondering whether meaning could exist without dominance," came Zwexhara's translated thoughts, filtered through Kelvin's strained consciousness. "Your species demonstrates this possibility. You create significance through acceptance rather than transcendence. But how do you know this will not eventually trigger the same cosmic rejection we experienced?" Captain Vantham found herself in direct philosophical dialogue with a being older than human civilization, discussing concepts that touched the very foundation of existence. "We don't know," she admitted through the psychic link. "But we've chosen to find meaning in uncertainty rather than let fear of possible consequences prevent us from trying. Our consciousness doesn't seek to dominate reality, we're content to be part of it." The honesty of her response created ripples through the alien network that reached other individual Velthoan consciousness. For beings who had spent millennia operating from absolute certainty about cosmic law, the human willingness to act meaningfully despite uncertainty was profoundly challenging. They had built their post-transcendence existence on the conviction that they understood universal mechanisms, but humanity suggested that understanding might be less important than choosing to act with purpose regardless of comprehension. Additional Velthoan entities began to emerge from the collective, their individual personalities slowly reasserting themselves after centuries of suppression. Each one brought different perspectives on their mission, different interpretations of the cosmic mechanisms they believed they understood. The unified countdown began to fragment as individual ships responded to the commands of rediscovered personalities rather than collective will. Admiral Brennan's voice carried cautious optimism as he reported developments across the affected systems. "Captain, we're seeing similar patterns throughout the alien fleet. Some ships are maintaining their countdown sequences, but others are beginning to break formation. It appears that your philosophical intervention is having a cascading effect on their entire force structure." Dr. Ashworth detected fundamental changes in the quantum signatures around their local alien vessels. The energy patterns suggest they're no longer drawing power for planet-killing weapons. Instead, they seem to be channeling their capabilities toward exploration. They're scanning our ships and nearby celestial bodies with what appears to be scientific curiosity rather than tactical assessment. Zwxhara's communication grew stronger as the entity's individual identity continued to reassert itself. If consciousness can create meaning through acceptance rather than dominance, then perhaps the cosmic mechanisms we fear respond to intent rather than capability. Your species suggests that we may have triggered universal rejection not through our power, but through our desire to transcend universal law rather than work within it. The countdown reached 18 hours, but its meaning had fundamentally changed. What had begun as preparation for cosmic mercy killing was transforming into something unprecedented, a collaboration between species separated by trauma and philosophy, working together to understand the true relationship between consciousness and cosmic order. The philosophical breakthrough triggered a cascade of individual awakenings throughout the Velthuan fleet. Ships that had maintained perfect formation for centuries began to drift apart as their crews rediscovered personal perspective and individual will. Through Kelvin's increasingly stable connection, dozens of distinct personalities emerged from the collective consciousness, each bringing unique insights about their civilization's fate and humanity's potential. Zwxhara served as the primary conduit for these emerging individualities, translating concepts between species and frameworks of understanding separated by millions of years of divergent evolution. "We are remembering who we were before the collective," came the entity's thoughts, now carrying traces of personality that had been dormant since their transcendence. "The trauma of erasure convinced us that individual perspective was weakness, but your species demonstrates it may be strength." Dr. Ashworth detected remarkable changes in the alien vessel's energy signatures as individual Velthuan began to assert control over their ship systems. Instead of the cold mathematical precision that had characterized their approach, the fleet now showed variations in movement patterns, power distribution, and scanning frequencies that suggested personal choice and curiosity. "They're beginning to explore rather than evaluate," she reported to Captain Vantham. "Each ship is taking different approaches to studying our technology and behavior." A second entity emerged from the psychic connection, introducing itself through concepts that Kelvin translated as Velthuan. Where Zwxhara had been a philosopher-artist, Velthuan had been something equivalent to a cosmic engineer, someone who had helped develop the reality manipulation techniques that had ultimately triggered their civilization's erasure. The guilt this entity carried was devastating, knowledge that their greatest achievement had led to universal rejection of their entire species. "I designed the thought-matter interface that allowed our people to create reality from consciousness," Velthuan communicated through layers of shame and regret. "When the cosmic mechanisms responded by unmaking us, I convinced myself that consciousness itself was the error. But your memories suggest that the error was in trying to replace universal law rather than work within it." Captain Vantham found herself serving as both diplomat and therapist, helping traumatized alien entities process guilt that had festered for millennia while simultaneously negotiating the survival of human civilization. Her command experience had prepared her for impossible decisions, but nothing had prepared her for offering psychological comfort to beings whose understanding of reality dwarfed human comprehension. "Guilt is part of consciousness," she communicated through the psychic link. "What matters is what you do with it. Your people tried to prevent others from experiencing your fate, that came from compassion, even if the method was flawed. Now you have the opportunity to channel that compassion differently." The transformation accelerated as more individual Velthuan personalities emerged from collective suppression. Each one brought different perspectives on their mission, different interpretations of cosmic law, and different responses to human demonstration of meaning through acceptance rather than transcendence. The countdown systems on various ships began operating independently, some slowing dramatically while others stopped entirely. Dr. Mendelssohn's analysis via quantum link proved crucial in understanding the psychological mechanics of what was happening. The Velthuan collective consciousness was a trauma response, a way of avoiding individual responsibility for their civilization's fate. As they rediscover individual perspective, they're being forced to confront personal choices rather than hiding behind collective certainty. This is profoundly therapeutic, but also destabilizing. Kelvin's connection revealed the true complexity of Velthoan civilization as individual memories began to surface. They had been a species of remarkable diversity, with countless different approaches to consciousness, meaning, and cosmic relationship. The trauma of erasure had compressed this diversity into unified purpose, but human influence was allowing their original complexity to re-emerge. We were not always united in our approach to transcendence, Zyxhara communicated, sharing memories of philosophical debates that had raged for centuries before their civilization's end. Many of our people argued for working within cosmic constraints rather than transcending them. Their voices were silenced when the erasure began, but your species echoes their wisdom. Admiral Brennan reported that similar awakenings were occurring throughout the affected star systems, but with concerning variations. Captain, while many alien ships are backing down from their countdown sequences, others are accelerating toward completion. It appears that some Velthoan entities are interpreting the philosophical breakthrough differently. They're convinced that allowing consciousness to proliferate will inevitably trigger another cosmic reset. The fleet around Kepler 442b reflected this divide. 3 ships showed signs of individual awakening and philosophical reconsideration, while long-range sensors detected other Velthoan vessels maintaining their original mission parameters. The species was experiencing something like civil war as individual perspectives clashed with collective trauma responses. Dr. Ashworth detected energy buildups in the distant ships that suggested weapon charging sequences. Captain, I think we're about to witness conflict between Velthoan factions. Some have embraced individual consciousness and are questioning their mission, while others view this development as confirmation that consciousness leads to chaos and must be eliminated. The countdown reached 12 hours, but its meaning had become fractured across dozens of individual perspectives. What had begun as unified cosmic mercy was transforming into a complex debate about consciousness, meaning, and the relationship between individual choice and universal order. The next few hours would determine not only humanity's fate, but the future evolution of an ancient species finally emerging from millennia of traumatic suppression. The philosophical divide within the Velthoan fleet erupted into open conflict as ships loyal to collective trauma confronted vessels commanded by newly awakened individual consciousness. Energy discharges that could unmake planets cracked across the void as ancient beings who had transcended physical existence waged war over the fundamental nature of consciousness and its place in cosmic order. Zyxhara's thoughts reached across the psychic link with desperate urgency as the entity tried to coordinate with other awakened individuals while avoiding destruction by collective loyalists. The trauma-bound refused to accept that consciousness can exist without triggering cosmic rejection. They see our individual awakening as proof that consciousness inevitably leads to chaos and universal threat. Captain Vantham watched the battle unfold on her tactical display, knowing that each exchange of energy represented the death of beings older than human civilization. Mr. Thrace, can we communicate with the collective loyalists? They need to understand that their fear of consciousness is exactly what's driving them toward the cosmic dominance they're trying to prevent. Kelvin's attempt to reach the collective loyalists met with devastating psychological resistance. Their traumatic certainty had become so absolute that any challenge to their worldview was interpreted as existential threat. They're experiencing our very existence as an attack on reality itself, he reported, blood trickling from his nose as alien terror pressed against his consciousness. They can't perceive the difference between consciousness that works within cosmic law and consciousness that tries to transcend it. Dr. Ashworth detected massive energy buildups from the collective loyalist ships, signatures that suggested they were preparing to implement their original planet dismantling plan regardless of philosophical developments. Captain, they're charging weapons capable of molecular disassembly. If they can't eliminate consciousness through persuasion, they're going to attempt elimination through force. The battle between Velthoan factions reached critical intensity as individual awakening spread through more ships while collective trauma responses became increasingly desperate. Velthoan's engineering background allowed the entity to coordinate defensive measures among the individualist faction, but they were outnumbered by collective loyalists who had maintained their original mission parameters. Admiral Brennan's voice carried grim determination as reports flooded in from across human space. Captain, the collective loyalists are beginning their countdown termination sequences in multiple systems. We have approximately 8 hours before they begin systematic dismantling of human colonies. The individualist faction is fighting to prevent this, but they're taking heavy casualties. Captain Van Them realized that humanity's survival now depended on supporting the Velthuan individuals who had chosen consciousness over collective fear. Dr. Ashworth, can we provide any assistance to the individualist faction? Our technology might be primitive compared to theirs, but perhaps there's something we can contribute to their defense. The answer came from an unexpected source as Zyxhara and other awakened Velthuan began to coordinate with human vessels. Their transcendent understanding of quantum mechanics allowed them to enhance human defensive systems far beyond normal capabilities, while human tactical experience and individual creativity provided strategic insights that collective consciousness had suppressed for millennia. Your species understands cooperation between diverse perspectives. Velthuan communicated as the entity integrated human tactical data with Velthuan defensive systems. We had forgotten that consciousness is strengthened by diversity rather than threatened by it. Working with your people reminds us of what we lost when we abandoned individual identity. The combined human Velthuan individualist force began to turn the tide of battle as creativity and flexibility overcame rigid collective responses. Human unpredictability proved especially effective against Velthuan collective tactics, which had been optimized for scenarios where all consciousness followed predictable patterns based on shared traumatic certainty. Dr. Ashworth discovered that human neural patterns could actually stabilize awakening Velthuan consciousness, preventing newly individual entities from being reabsorbed into collective trauma responses. The diversity of human thought provides anchoring points for Velthuan individual identity, she explained to Captain Van Them. Our psychological frameworks are so different from theirs that contact with human consciousness makes it impossible for them to completely merge back into collective patterns. The battle reached its climax as collective loyalist forces attempted a final coordinated assault on both human worlds and individualist Velthuan ships. But the awakened entities had learned to fight not as unified force, but as diverse individuals choosing cooperation, a tactical approach the collective had no framework for understanding or countering. Kelvin's psychic connection revealed the moment when the collective began to fragment under pressure from too many individual perspectives emerging simultaneously. They're losing cohesion, he reported with exhausted triumph. The trauma that held them together is breaking down under the weight of all these rediscovered individual identities. The countdown reached its final hour, but instead of planetary destruction, it marked the completion of the most profound transformation in galactic history. An ancient species was rediscovering individual consciousness while a young species was learning that consciousness could transcend even cosmic trauma through cooperation and acceptance rather than dominance and transcendence. The war was ending, but the true transformation was just beginning as humans and awakened Velthuan began to explore what consciousness could achieve when guided by wisdom rather than fear, diversity rather than uniformity, and acceptance rather than the desperate attempt to escape cosmic limitations. In the aftermath of the philosophical war, silence settled over the void around Kepler 442b like a gentle benediction. The remaining collective loyalist ships had either been destroyed or had undergone their own awakening transformations, their crews finally understanding that consciousness could coexist with cosmic order without triggering universal rejection. What remained was something unprecedented in galactic history, two species working together to explore the deepest questions of existence. Zyxhara's individual personality had grown stronger through connection with human consciousness, developing what could only be described as friendship with Captain Van Them and her crew. The ancient entity had begun to remember not just the trauma of cosmic erasure, but the joy and wonder that had driven Velthuan civilization to explore the relationship between mind and reality. We spent so long fearing consciousness that we forgot why consciousness was worth preserving, came the entity's thoughts, now tinged with something resembling peace. Dr. Ashworth worked alongside Velthuan and other awakened entities to establish permanent communication protocols that would allow ongoing cooperation between the species. The quantum mechanics of consciousness had become clearer through their interaction. Reality didn't reject consciousness that acknowledged its place within cosmic order, but rather consciousness that attempted to replace or transcend that order entirely. Kelvin's psychic abilities had been permanently enhanced by his extended contact with Velthoan consciousness, but more importantly, he had gained perspective on human consciousness that no previous contact with alien life had provided. They show us what we could become if we let fear drive us toward transcendence, he reflected to Captain Vantham. But we also show them what they could have remained if they had chosen acceptance over escape. The philosophical implications of their encounter would reshape both species' understanding of their place in the universe. Humanity had learned that consciousness was not unique in facing cosmic indifference, while the Velthoan had rediscovered that individual perspective and cooperative diversity were strengths rather than weaknesses in the face of universal challenges. Admiral Brennan's final report came with news that awakening transformations were occurring throughout the galaxy as individual Velthoan consciousness spread the lessons learned through contact with humanity. Ancient fleets that had spent millennia preparing to eliminate emerging consciousness were instead becoming protectors and teachers, sharing their vast knowledge while learning new approaches to meaning and purpose. But the victory carried profound sadness as the true cost of the Velthoan's cosmic trauma became clear. Billions of individual entities had been lost when their civilization was erased from reality, and countless millennia of potential growth and exploration had been sacrificed to collective fear. Their species would never fully recover what had been unmade, though they could choose how to honor their losses while building something new. Captain Vantham found herself changed by the encounter in ways that would influence the rest of her career. She had served as both diplomat and therapist to beings whose understanding dwarfed human comprehension, yet had discovered that wisdom often lay not in transcendent knowledge but in the choice to act with compassion despite uncertainty. Her reports would become foundational documents for future human-alien relations. Dr. Ashworth's research into consciousness and cosmic order would establish new fields of study that bridged xenobiology, philosophy, and quantum mechanics. Her work with the Velthoan had proven that consciousness was not inherently threatening to cosmic stability, but that the intent behind consciousness, whether toward dominance or cooperation, determined its relationship with universal order. Velthoan chose to remain in human space, serving as both teacher and student in the ongoing exploration of consciousness and meaning. The entity's engineering knowledge would prove invaluable in advancing human technology, while human creativity and individuality continued to help Velthoan personalities rediscover aspects of themselves that had been suppressed for eons. As the human fleet prepared to depart Kepler 442b, the space around them had been fundamentally transformed. Where once there had been threatening alien vessels preparing for cosmic mercy killing, now there were partners in the greatest philosophical adventure in galactic history. The dark ships remained, but they no longer carried the weight of trauma and fear. Instead, they had become vessels of exploration and wonder. Zwexhara's final communication carried the bittersweet wisdom of a species that had learned the hardest lessons about consciousness and survival. We cannot undo the erasure of our people or reclaim the eons lost to collective trauma. But we can choose how their memory guides us forward. Through cooperation with your species, we honor both what was lost and what can still be built. The stars themselves seemed brighter as humanity and the awakened Velthoan began their joint exploration of consciousness, meaning, and the infinite possibilities that emerged when diverse perspectives chose cooperation over fear. The universe remained vast and indifferent, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the light of two species choosing to create meaning together despite cosmic uncertainty. In the end, the greatest victory was not the prevention of human extinction, but the resurrection of hope in beings who had forgotten that consciousness could be a gift rather than a curse, that individual perspective could strengthen rather than threaten cosmic order, and that meaning could be found not in transcending limitations but in choosing how to live meaningfully within them.